Okay, so what I want to do is I want to do a little bit of a presentation on sort of an intro to React that doesn't look at all the sort of other pieces that you'll end up looking at with React, which we will also end up doing. We'll look at the sort of ecosystem that React is in as well. One of the things that I was going to do initially is sort of do this on JSBin, but I think let's actually get started. We'll actually do this thing from scratch, create an application. I think one of the things that happens with React is that people get very intimidated by the ecosystem of React, and you don't have to. And what I'm getting at is that fine, they might be using, 30 different packages in their React application, but you could build a React application by using 3 packages. So that's kind of what I want to get at here. So what I'm going to do here is I've just got an empty directory. I'm going to do an npm init, and I'm going to go over here. I'm going to install a couple of packages. So right off the bat, I'm going to do this with Express. A lot of times you'll see with React applications, people will end up using Webpack and things like that. They're only doing that because they don't want to end up adding Express into their applications, right? They want to sort of keep it simple and just do React. Express. Express is easy for you. Add it to get started. So I'm going to end up putting in Express. I'm going to end up putting in React. I'm going to end up putting in React DOM, okay? And I'm going to say save. npm install Express, React DOM, save. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep things relatively simple. I'm going to create a server file. And let me open up my editor of choice. And I'm going to go over here in my server file. And might as well use some ES6 stuff, sort of getting to the point where I'm going to show you that you could use it client side as well. And most of this stuff in the node environment that you're in is going to be available. So you've probably seen a lot of this stuff already. So we're going to say Express, and we're going to require Express, and I'm going to need path, and I'm going to require path. And this is a little bit different. Usually I just will write even less code than this. And we're going to end up creating our app, which is going to be Express. And off the bat, I'm going to need a couple of very simplistic static routes. So I'm going to say app.use, and this is going to be, so for the moment, I'm actually going to not even use this at some point, but at the beginning, I'll end up using this. So I'm going to say node modules, and I'm going to say express static, and I'm going to say path.join, and I'm going to be joining my current directory and my node modules folder. So I've got this app. I'm going to do one other one here. So eventually I'm going to end up using this. So I'm going to put in dist for distribution. These are going to be files that are going to be generated. I showed you some of this already. And this is going to go into dist, which doesn't exist yet. All right. So now we've got a couple of routes that we're going to end up using. And now I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say app.get. And this is going to be slash. And I'm going to use some ES6 syntax. This is just in place of putting function. This allows me to declare a function. And I could actually do this pretty easily. I'm just going to say response.sendFile. And this is going to be path.join. And this is going to be directory name. And this is going to be index.html. And 2, 3. And let's just put in here. This is going to be request, response, next, even though I'm not using next. And we'll go over here, and I'm going to specify that I'm going to have a port. And the port is going to be process environment port, which would be what you'd get on something like Heroku. And I'm going to say 3000 here. And I'm going to say app.listen. And I'm going to say port. And once I start listening, I'm going to say console.log, and I'm going to use my ES6 syntax, listening on port, and this is going to be the port. So it just saves me from doing string concatenation, which is kind of a nice thing. And that should be enough to start the app. Again, you could go through this a little bit slower if you wanted to. The next thing I'm going to do here is in my package JSON file, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say start dev. And right now, this is going to be just nodemon server, this server, basically. And I've got nodemon installed globally. So at this point, if I say npm run start dev, should end up starting my server. And if I were to go over here and say localhost 3000, it's going to tell me that it can't find this file that it's looking for. So let's go over here and we'll say modify add index.html. This error will end up going away, but I won't see anything. And let's go in and let's start putting in some code. So the fact that we have React, one of the things we could end up doing here is in the head of our document, going in and putting in a script, and we'll do a source, and we've mounted up our node modules folder. So this is going to be React, and I think it's dist react.js. I'm going to show you don't really even have to do this, but again, starting off, we're not really going to be using anything fancy at all. If I was to go and do this just to make sure that I have that path right, I could open up my console, I could reload this page. And let's just see, actually that's not a bad sign. Let's make sure I have that syntax right. So script source, body, and my JavaScript file, that's fine. It ended up finding the file. If I was to go, just for the sake of argument, go to my console, and I type in React, I could see that this is React. This is actually called, there's a word for this. When you end up bringing in a JavaScript file and you have this global variable available, this is called like it's a UMD file, universal module definition or something like that, meaning that it's just naked out there in the open. You could use it. The fact that you've ended up bringing this file. When we use Webpack and that sort of thing, we don't end up using this, but this is always good to sort of get you started. We're also going to need React DOM. So I'm going to go over here, and this is going to be React DOM, and this should be the same thing.
That just like a note that said you shouldn't do this or you'll get fired.
I think it could be. I think so. I hope so, because I don't want to get fired. So let's hope it's a joke. Yeah, I think basically maybe you're not supposed to be using this React object directly, which is true. You'll end up using the classes of React. So we do that, okay? And if we look at our network, we've got these two files. So I'm going to have another file that I'm going to put here. This is going to be in dist. And I'm going to modify this. I'm going to call this index. I'm actually going to call it build.js because that's what it's eventually going to be. I'm going to say console.log, hello. And let's just see if we can grab that one as well. And we'll go over here, and this is going to be, actually, let's just do this. Script, source. Again, we've mounted up dist. Actually, I didn't want to call it build. I want to call it bundle.js. This is just a common practice when we do end up bundling this file. So let me just move this to bundle.js, okay? And let's rerun that, and we see hello. That's a great sign, okay? Now, what I want to do is I want to start using React. And the way that React works is that there's always a mounting point in your application for React. So all React does in its basis, is that it's used for building your DOM, okay? And basically, it's very good at building your DOM. One of the things that it's good at is that if part of your, if the state of your application changes, React is very good. It will redraw the entire, let me rephrase this, it'll redraw only the parts of the DOM that it ends up needing to redraw. And it's very good at that. One of the reasons it's very good at that is the way that data flows in a React application. One of the things that you saw with one of the other lectures was the idea of how sometimes scope in an Angular application could really end up throwing you for a loop. So the idea of sort of doing things with like services and having this constant, source of truth, but only returning copies and that sort of thing, that's kind of a little bit of a React philosophy. What I want to do here is that one of the things that I want to do is I want to access this DOM. So I'm going to put in defer over here. This means that it's going to really load at the end of my page. And just as a sort of sanity check, I'm going to go over here and I'll say root equals document get element by ID root, and I'll say console.log root. And if I go over here, I'll see that it ends up finding this document. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually do a little bit of React. And this is the most simple thing you could end up doing with React, is that I could specify, hey, look, React DOM, okay, that's one of the things that I get. This is this universal object. I'm going to say, React DOM, I want you to render. Well, what do I want you to render? Well, I'm just going to pretend that I've got this app. And what I do is I can't go and just create DOM elements. Okay, I've got to create React DOM elements. Okay, because I'm dealing with the React DOM. Okay, and the React DOM is aware of the regular DOM. Okay, and so in order to build a React element, what I can say is my app is going to be React create element, and there's certain elements it can create right off the bat. I can create a div. Okay, but to keep it simple, let me just create an HR tag, because that'll show up right off the bat, and we'll see it. And what I'm going to do here is when I say render, React DOM.render, I'm going to say render my app, and that second parameter is what you want to render it on. Okay? Very sort of simplistic thing, and you'll see that I've got this horizontal rule. Doesn't really buy you all that much, okay? But I want to show you a couple of other sort of basic things that you could do with this. The sort of syntax for React element has three parts, okay? So I could put in a div, okay? I've got a second thing here, and these are going to be what are called properties for this element, okay? One of the properties might be the class name for the element. So just for the sake of argument, what I'm going to do over here is I'll say class is equal to will. And the third parameter, or any parameters following it, are considered to be child elements. So what I could do is inside my div, I could say hello. Okay? That's a perfectly valid element, but in order to see this, and actually that should be a string, okay? In order to see this in action, okay, what I'm going to end up needing to do here is, let me actually just do a quick install of Bootstrap, so I'll see this. npm install Bootstrap. Save. And I'm going to go up over here, and in my index page, I'm going to say link, related is style sheet, and I'll say href equals / and this is going to be node modules, bootstrap, dist, css, bootstrap, css. And that should end up finding that CSS file. And let me start this up again. And I'm going to go back here and reload this. And I just say hello, but I've got a little bit of a thing here. By the way, you're seeing that it caught Bootstrap, right? Because you're seeing that sans serif font. But I've got an error here. So one of the things is that, this is JavaScript that I'm writing. Class is a reserved word. Okay? So when you want to specify the class of something with React, first lesson, okay, what we're going to do here is this is going to be not class, but class name. Okay? And now this shows up, and that's it, we're done. Okay? Obviously not. One of the things right off the bat when you end up using React, okay, and I'll I'm going to do this once, and then I'm going to move away, and we're going to start looking at Webpack. But just to sort of show you something else here, let's say you wanted to nest some things together. So let's say that I want to have, instead of this, I want to have an unordered list. I want this to be an unordered list. The class name for my unordered list is going to be list group. And the child that I want to have here is a list item. So above this, I'm going to say my list item is React create element list item class name list group item. And this is going to be, here I want to put some text, so we always like to use foo. And we'll go over here and do that. And I'll say that my child of my UL is my list item. And now I want to render my unordered list. And now I've got this unordered list. And just to beat a dead horse a little bit, I'll create a second one here. And this one is going to be bar. And I'll go over here and I'm going to say li and also li2. And now I've got foo and I've got bar. Now, right off the bat, no one wants to write code like this, right? It's going to be a big drag to do. And that's why right off the bat, with any of these React tutorials, usually right off the bat, you end up using JSX to avoid this sort of thing. So in order to end up using JSX, although we could actually bring in a file and end up using JSX, it's really easier to look at Webpack. I want you guys to get comfortable with Webpack. It's not too big a deal to get it working, and that's what we're going to end up setting up now. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to install Webpack, npm install Webpack. I'm going to save this. Even though it really is a dev dependency, I'm saving it as dependency because when I deploy to Heroku, I'm going to actually want the Webpack to run to basically generate my code file. Okay, that's why I'm not doing a save dev. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to do save. And again, one thing I want to be clear about, I don't want anyone to get all freaked out about Webpack. It's fairly simple. Okay, so Webpack has a single configuration file. So what I'm going to do here, so I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to go to my package.json, and I'm going to specify Webpack. Okay, every right to do this, and I know where Webpack is installed. It's node modules, and it's Webpack has a bin, and there's a file Webpack.js, and this will automatically look for a Webpack config file. So when I want this to run, even if, again, I'm not typing in Webpack. That would run Webpack, what I have installed globally. I'm going to say Webpack. I'm going to say npm run Webpack. And I'll get an error message here because I'm not really giving it enough information to run. So let me now set up my environment for Webpack, and we'll get that working, and we're going to forget about it in a little bit. I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to say webpack.config.js. Real simple here, okay? I'm going to bring in my path module, path, and for this, I've got to do module.exports. And what am I going to end up exporting? I'm going to export this object, and it's going to have an entry, okay? My entry is going to be in source index.js. And I went over this before, but this is going to be the starting point for my Webpack, okay? The only other thing that I need to do is specify the output. The output, there's a couple of ways to do that, but the output really has a couple of things. Path being, well, what directory do you want to have it in? And I'm going to say path.join, dir name, and my dist folder. File name, what do you want to call it? Bundle.js, okay? That's it. That's all you need to write Webpack. Everyone agree? This is not all that intimidating. Entry output, that's it. You got to look it up, Do it 5 times, you're going to remember it. Okay? So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to run this again. Okay? It's telling me that it can't find source index.js. So let me go back over here. And I'm going to say index. Didn't do that right. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to create my source directory. And here I'm going to put in index.js. Now it'll end up finding the file, and it'll go and not really build out much of anything. Well, that's not really true. It's got a bunch of this stuff in here that Webpack ends up doing. Again, why Webpack? Webpack makes it easy to end up bringing in other libraries. So one of the things that we could end up doing here with Webpack is we could go and sort of get exactly where we were before by doing something like, and I'm not going to do this with ES6, and then I'm going to do it with ES6. I'm going to say React equals require React. And I'm going to say React DOM equals require React DOM. Okay? These are the NPM packages. Okay? And I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say root equals document get element by ID root. And I'll say React DOM.render. And we're going to just keep this simple. I'm going to say React create element, and I'm going to do my HR again until I end up bringing in JSX, and we're going to add this to the root. Okay? I'm going to run Webpack again. See that it ends up finding these files, and then I'm going to say npm run start dev. Okay? Now if I go back here, I'm back to my HR tag. Okay? Everyone good with this? Fairly simple. In fact, let me do one thing. Things are a little redundant. Now all of a sudden I don't need this and I don't need this because they're all being bundled together. That's what Webpack does. Webpack is a bundler that will bundle your JavaScript files. It also can bundle your CSS files as well, although I've never done it, so I don't know how to do it. But people do it all the time. And now I just see that one message over here. Okay? Now, number one, I want to use my JSX. Number two, I want to make sure that any changes to my JavaScript files are going to make that Webpack rerun. The other thing, and this is actually important too, you want to do this, is that this is very important. It's very important if someone was to go and look at this application. I want to touch a git, ignore, and I want to go into this. For some reason, I can't get my .git files to open up in Vim. I want to go over here and I want to ignore dist. Okay? Because again, that's going to be stuff that's auto-generated. If I say git init, and I say git.status, notice I don't see that dist folder showing up. Okay? Now again, real simple, no gulp. You want to use gulp, use gulp. You don't have to. It's not that complicated. Okay? When I go to start my dev, what I want to do is I want to say, notice I can do this. Within this command, I could say npm run Webpack. Okay? Now, it's also interesting. What I can do here, by the way, I can do this manually as well. What I want to do is I want to pass to Webpack the -w flag to have it watch. Okay? If I just did this, -w, it wouldn't work because it would be passing that to npm run. Okay? I want to actually pass it into Webpack. So when you want to pass some flags in to the underlying process, you do a -- first. That's why you see that. Okay? It's passing it to the underlying process. It's Webpack that I want to watch, not npm run. Okay? If I try to do npm run and I try to watch it, it's going to say, I don't know that flag. Okay? But Webpack knows that flag. The other thing that I want to do, and this is, again, it's not that complicated. Again, I might have to look at it first. I want to say, hey, look, don't wait for this to finish because it ain't never going to finish. It's going to sit there and watch. Okay? But also, concurrently with this, I want to start my nodemon. And by the way, I don't want my nodemon restarting if it sees something change in my source file, and if it sees something change in my dist file. Okay? Anything all that complicated here? Watching my Webpack, okay? So it looks and sees if that index file changes, right? That's my starting point for this stuff, or anything that index ends up depending on. It'll end up rebuilding. Again, I don't want my node mon to end up rerunning. Once I end up doing this, tells me my address is in use because it is. Let's kill this, run it again. Now it's watching it, it's listening on this port, and we could end up going on with Webpack. If I end up making a change here, and I say console.log, fizzbuzz, okay, I'll see that'll end up showing up here. Okay. Now there's two things that I need to do. Okay. I want to have ES6. It's going to make my life a lot easier when I'm writing React. Okay. I also want to have JSX. I don't want to have to create elements with these functions. I want it to be much more simplistic. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to kill this. Okay. There are two things. There's a number of things that I'm going to need here. There's actually 4 things. Okay. npm install, I'm going to need the Babel loader. Okay, this I just memorize. I'm going to also need what's called the Babel Core. Okay, Babel is the thing that's going to be doing this transformation. So Webpack bundles things. Okay, Babel is going to transform. Babel is going to transform my JavaScript that's ES6 compliant into non-ES6, so it'll definitely work on browsers. It's going to also turn simple HTML, okay, into that complex React create element crap. Okay, so there's 2 things. There's a couple of other things that I'm going to need here: Babel loader, Babel core, and I'm going to need Babel preset React, Babel preset ES 2015. And I'm going to save all of these because, again, when I go and put it up to Heroku, I'm going to have a post install that'll just end up running my Webpack. Okay? So when I end up doing that, there's one change that I'm going to make here. And this, sometimes I screw up a little bit, and I could actually do this all in this file. So there's a parameter here called module. Okay? Module has a loaders property. Loaders is an array. Okay? There's a couple of things that I have to tell my loaders property. I have to tell my loaders property, hey, loaders property, which files are you going to be interested in? So I'm going to specify, you do this with a test, like you're testing a regular expression. Okay? Files that have a dot, okay, I'm escaping the dot, JS, they end in that, those are the ones that I want to work with. Okay? I want to exclude the node modules folder. And I got to be honest, I forget sometimes if it's exclude or ignore, but I don't want it to go in and start thinking that it's got to do everything in the node modules folder, because then it's going to take a long time. I got a lot of things in the node modules folder. And for my loader is actually going to be Babel. Okay? Now, if I just ended up doing this, and I go back here, and it's already killed already, and I go back here and I do start dev, unexpected token, so this is in my test. See where that, I'm sorry, a little tricky. This has to be an object, right? Because your loaders, you can have multiple loaders. Okay, and let me run that again. Okay, so it goes and it ends up bundling it up. Now, what I want to do here is I want to go over here, and I could set this up with a separate Babel configuration file, but I could also do this, and I could say, let me make sure I have this right, query, presets. And the presets that I want to use are React and ES 2015. So notice those names, right? This is what Babel ends up using, right? Babel dash preset dash React, Babel dash preset dash ES 2015. So if I end up putting both these things in here, let's just see. Again, you have to rerun your Webpack because you changed that file. Okay, that runs. Let's actually test it out. Okay, the way that we're going to end up testing this out to see if this is working is I'm going to go in here to my index file, and I'm going to do something a little bit more complicated. Inside of my render over here, I'm going to go in here and put in what looks like HTML. Okay, that's definitely not valid JavaScript. Let's see if that rebuilds. Looks like it rebuilt. And it worked. Okay? Again, I'm not saying that the first time, and even me, I've done this for a while, that this is the simplest thing to do, but it's not crazy. Okay? When you go through some of these things, you know, when they're starting out with a file, and you could do this. It's not that hard to sort of get started with it. Now, what I'm going to end up doing here is that I'm going to do something a little, I don't think I'm going to have a ton of time to do it, but I'm going to start out with some interesting things that I'm able to do. First of all,
Sorry, what was that test in the loader?
this tells the Webpack config what files do you want to transpile. Babel is transpiling files. There can be other files in those folders that you're pulling in. It knows what you want the extensions of the file, because again, what it's doing is it's taking that JS file and it's turning, and you could look at it. Again, this is going to be a pretty big file because again, it's bundling it together. In fact, it's taking a while to load here. Could crash.
What folder is it looking at?
What do you mean?
So it's looking for a JS file. So what?
No, very, very importantly, very important. It's starting from the index.js. Okay, that's what it's looking for. And this looks like it could have possibly even crashed my Vim.
That huge?
It's probably a pretty big file. But then again, if you bring in React and all these other things, it's going to be pretty big too. So let me just see. Let's go in here. See if we finally loaded it. Now, all right, I'm killing this. And let's go in and just open it up again. And you're going to have to sort of take my word for it. So let's start this up again. Actually, probably didn't even need to kill that. And again, if I go over here, right, I'm at that same spot. Okay. So let's just talk a little bit about how React is going to work. One of the things that I really want to do here, which is probably a lot more likely, is what I actually want to do is I want to go and mount an application. Okay? This doesn't exist. Okay? This doesn't exist. If I went back over here, right, it would end up building, but if I go over here and I try to run this, it'll tell me I don't know what app is. Okay? One of the things that I could do with ES6, there's a couple of different ways to do this, but one of the ways that I can do this is I can create a class called app. Okay? Under the scenes, what it'll end up doing is that it's going to end up using its React create element with that app. Okay? But you don't have to worry about it. What you're doing is you're basically, when you think about React, what I want you to think about is components. And what I'm doing here is I'm going to change things a little bit. So instead of saying, let's do this with our ES6 syntax, so I'm going to say import React from React. A little bit easier than the require, okay? That's something that you could do with ES6. I don't know if you spoke about it in your talk or one of the things that you didn't. But I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say I'm also going to import React DOM from React DOM. And I'm going to show you something else that I'm going to end up needing. By the way, this should work exactly the same as it did before. This will end up rebuilding. And I'll get that same error that I have here. Okay? What I really want to do is I want to create a React component. Okay? So not only am I going to import React, but this is a way that I can, so what you can end up doing with this ES6 syntax is you have the ability to export multiple things. Okay? Again, you're going to eventually figure out how to do that. But what this says is that, hey, look, there's this thing that's exportable inside of React called component, and I want it. Okay? So I'm pulling in component, and I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to say const app equals, let me actually be a little clearer about this. I'm going to say class app, it extends React, excuse me. I could do this, by the way. This will work. But again, I want to show you that ES6 goodness because you're going to see it all over the place and you're going to end up getting comfortable with it, even if it's just the next two classes. Okay? This now is a class. This now exists as a React component. So React, under the scenes, is going to do create element with app. Okay? How does it know that that component is in React?
Yeah. Sorry.
I mean, it doesn't know. I know. Yeah. Okay? So if I go over here, this should build. Okay? Now I get a different message. The message says, if you have a React component, all React components are good at is rendering. Okay? So if you're going to create a React class, you better have a render method. Okay? And if I want to have a render method, what I can do here is go over here and say, again, this is a syntax. I have to get used to it. You have to get used to it. We all have to get used to it, which basically is going to create a JavaScript prototype object behind the scene. This is the ES6 syntax for creating classes and instantiating classes. You can create your own classes with this if you want to, but it's got to have a render, and on top of that, the render has to return something. Now, if you want to return something, one of the things that you're going to do, okay, since this is JavaScript, is put this in parentheses. This way, you can have multi-lines and it'll look nice and clean. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put a UL, class name, list group, end of UL, list item, class name, equals list group item, foo. And I'm going to go in here, and I'll do that. And I'll go over here, and I'll say bar. And we'll go over here, and I'll get foo and bar. Okay? By the way, a lot of the tutorials are going to go in and say, hey, look, use Webpack dev server, use hot reloading, get this thing. Don't worry about it. Learn React first. Then worry about all those bells and whistles that you could end up using. Okay? Again, it wasn't a huge stretch for us to use JSX. Okay? Couple of lines in a Webpack file. Okay? I'm going to post this up. You could grab it, but you could also sit down, do it from scratch. Okay? You're going to mess up one line. You're going to forget the word module. You're going to forget the word loaders. Do it a few times.
I just thought if you use JSX, part of the point would be .jsx.
You could. Some people do it as JSX. I don't know. I see it both ways. And you could just test the JSX files if you wanted to. And maybe that's a better way to do it. And right off the bat, I'm going to tell you, I'm no React expert. Okay? So, yeah, there could be some things I'm telling you that might not be, totally kosher. Thomas? There's no TypeScript. No TypeScript. TypeScript is, is Angular 2's thing, and I think they're sort of moving away from it anyway, because I think ES6 accomplishes what you'd want to do with TypeScript. Now, let me just do a couple of things here, okay? So one of the things that I could end up doing here, let's just make this a little bit interesting. What I'm going to do is instead of returning a just that, what you do with React is you do composition, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to compose something. I'm going to compose a header, and I'm going to compose something called to-dos list, okay? This will not work, okay? The reason why this won't work is that, remember when we did React element? It's got to have some root, okay? So there always has to be some root. So you can't just do two siblings here. It's got to be surrounded in something. Now again, this might totally bundle correctly. In fact, it doesn't bundle correctly. It gives me this message. I can't do it because it can't create the JSX for me. Excuse me, it can't create the JavaScript for me. So I need to go here and put this inside of a div. Okay? Now this will go and we'll end up rendering, but of course when I do this, okay, it's not going to find header. All right? Let me bring up something else. You don't always need classes to create components. Okay? There's what are called smart components, and there are components that are called kind of dumb. They're presentational components. They're very, very simple to create. Okay? I could create a presentational component very simply by doing this. Const header equals a function. Okay? One of the things with this that happens with ES6, if this is just a one-liner, a return is assumed. I don't even have to put a return there. One-liner, I could go in here, h1 my app, h1. Okay? This is a valid line of ES6. I shouldn't say that. It's a valid line of ES6. That JSX is going to turn into regular JavaScript. Okay? That's going to happen with Babel. Babel is transpiling. Okay? It's in the pipeline. It gets transpiled. Webpack is putting it all together. I'm going to go over here. Here's my header. And just for the sake of argument, I'm going to do to-dos list. Okay? There's my app, my app. I'm going to change this a little bit. Here now I want to use multiple lines because I want to put my to-do list back here. So now once I end up going to multiple lines, again, a return in parentheses, and just to keep it simple here, I'll say UL Now if I go back here, I've got this, and I've got my unordered list. Okay? Let me just do one other thing here. One of the things that you have the ability to do is to pass data to your other components. Okay? So this is going to seem a little bit strange, but I'm going to end up doing it anyway, is that when you have a component, when you have a class has a constructor, okay? So behind the scenes, if you end up newing something up, okay? If you end up newing something up, what will end up happening here is that your constructor will end up getting called. One of the things that you have to do if your constructor ends up getting called, since this actually extends from another class, is you have to end up calling super. That's just how ES6 syntax works when one class extends from another class. Okay? What I'm going to do here, so what ends up happening, and this is going to be very, very quick, but what ends up happening with React is React has a state. Okay? And you have this state. I want you to think of the state as being on the top of your application. Okay? And the state gets passed down through properties. Okay? So what I'm going to do here is when my application loads, I'm going to create const, and I'm going to say to-dos equals, and I'm going to keep this real simple. I'm going to say foo and bar. Okay? And what I'm going to do over here, I'm going to say, this, very simply, this dot state to-dos equals to-dos. Okay? And let me just show you a little other magic that you have with ES6. Is that if you have a key and the value that are the same, and you're going to see this syntax. I don't want you to get intimidated by it. You're going to be able to do this. Okay? Now, what that gives me the ability to do is to pass these to-dos. If I want them to make it down to these other components, I've got to do it through what are called properties. Properties look like attributes. Okay? So if I want to pass these down, and I could call them anything, but if I want to pass them down, I'm going to pass them down, and I'm going to say this dot state to-dos. Okay? My state, what I want you to think about the state of my application, that's like my source of truth. Okay? The only way that things get changed is if the state ends up changing. Okay? I'm passing my props down. Okay? React is only being used to render my data. So I'm passing this down. I'm not using it yet, but it shouldn't break anything.
Like a more rigid scope.
It's more rigid that it only goes in one direction. Okay? If I rerun this, this should do the same thing, but I want to show you something here. When I end up passing props here, okay, this syntax, and again, this is sort of the dummy presentational components. Okay? What will automatically end up getting passed to that to-do list are my props. If I go over here and I say,
Now, why is that? Just because it's in. How does it know to do that?
I don't know.
It's just literally because it's in the same file?
I mean, it's just the way that React components end up working. I mean, what happens probably behind the scenes is that this turns into a React component that just has a render method.
I guess that's my question. Like, how does it know that that's a React component?
Well, I'm using it as a React component. Now, if I put it in with JSX,
Okay.
it goes in and looks at it and says, oh, okay, does this have a function that returns some JSX? I'm going to treat it as a React component. But you'll end up saying, these are good questions. I don't have the answers to this. But if I end up doing this here, and I say console log props, and that takes a minute to read, notice it's showing me my to-dos. Those are my props. Okay? And if I go over here, and I say, well, all right, these are my props, I want to show you one other thing, a little ES6 goodness here. Okay? Instead of doing props, this is called something like destructuring. Okay? If I pass an object here, and that object has this key, I can grab that object right away. I don't have to say props to do's. I say, hey, I just want it to do's. Okay? And I'm going to go over here, and what I'm going to do, show you something real fast here. What I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to say, and I'll use const, and I'll say li's equals to-dos.map. Now I have a to-do, but this is really just text, right? And I'm going to say list item, okay? So if I want to use some variable here, I put it in as my to-do. That's how you basically say, this is my value here. Again, behind the scenes, it's going to do a React element. It's going to do it as a child, okay? But if I end up doing that, and I go in here, and I put in li's, okay, what should end up happening here is I've got my foo and I've got my bar. I've got a little error message, okay? Because React says, hey, look, if I'm rendering a collection of items, you've got to differentiate them for me. You've got to give them a key so I know what they are. So a real simple, dumb way to give them a key is that when you end up doing a map, you have an IDX, and simply by going in here and specifying key equals IDX, you'll go in here and I could get that error to go away. Okay? This is my intro React. I maybe wanted to do a couple more things, but I'm going to have to run. So I'm going to stop this recording.